We all know the story. It's practically a secular gospel in the American education system. A young, deaf, blind girl stands at a water pump in Alabama. Her teacher, Ann Sullivan, pumps cold water over her hands while spelling the letters W-A-T-E-R into her palm. Suddenly, the light bulb goes off. The isolation is shattered. Individual grit, teacherly devotion, and the triumph of the human spirit over biological tragedy. Roll credits. In our collective imagination, Helen Keller's story essentially ends at that water pump. She's frozen in time as a saintly, passive symbol of inspiration. A blank slate onto who we can project our own feel-good narratives about overcoming adversity. But what if the history books cut her story short on purpose? Because the real Helen Keller was not a passive saint. She was a card-carrying, flag-waving, FBI-monitored, revolutionary socialist. By the time she graduated from Radcliffe College, becoming the first deaf-blind person to earn a Bachelor's of Arts, Keller was already moving far past the polite reformism of the elite. In 1909, she joined the Socialist Party of America. By 1912, she decided the regular socialists were too moderate and joined the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW, the Radical Revolutionary Labor Union known as the Wobblies. She didn't just hold these beliefs quietly. She hung a red flag over her desk, openly praised the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, and co-founded the American Civil Liberties Union. Naturally, this caught the attention of the state. The FBI opened a file on Keller that would eventually span decades, monitoring her letters, her associations, and her public speeches. To the Bureau, this world-renowned symbol of purity was a highly dangerous fellow traveler of the Communist Party. But why did a woman who couldn't see or hear become so deeply, aggressively obsessed with anti-capitalist economics? Keller's radicalism wasn't a separate hobby. It was the direct result of her disability advocacy. When Keller began working to help the blind, she didn't just look at eyeballs. She looked at systems. She started researching the demographics of who was actually losing their sight and hearing, and she noticed a glaring, inescapable pattern. Blindness was not distributed equally. It was concentrated heavily in the working class. She visited factories and physically felt the heavy, bone-rattling vibrations of the machines. She learned that industrial accidents, caused by factory owners refusing to install cheap safety guards to protect their profits, were blinding workers by the thousands. She realized that poverty led to malnutrition and untreated illnesses, which destroyed children's eyesight before they reached adulthood. In 1911, she wrote, "I fell into the mistake of believing that blindness was a misfortune beyond human control. But when I entered the struggle, I found that the industrial system under which we live is at the root of much of the physical deafness and blindness in the world." For Keller, trying to help disabled people without tackling the profit motive was like trying to scoop out the ocean with a spoon. If you wanted to prevent blindness, you had to dismantle capitalism. This is where the story gets dark. As long as Helen Keller was just a quiet, inspiring girl who smiled and raised money for charity, the corporate press praised her extravagantly. They called her the archpriestess of the sightless. But the second she pointed her finger at the captains of industry, the media turned on her with breathtaking cruelty. The editor of the Brooklyn Eagle, who had previously championed her, wrote that her socialistic ideas sprung from manifestations of the limitations of her development. In other words, she's deaf and blind, so she's easily brainwashed. Keller's response was legendary. She wrote back to the editor, reminding him that she had met him years prior, and back then he'd showered her with compliments. She wrote, "At that time, the compliments he paid me were so generous that I blush to remember them. But now that I have come out for socialism, he reminds me and the public that I am blind and deaf and especially liable to error." Because a disabled, highly intelligent woman holding a radical critique of capitalism was a massive threat to the status quo, society did something insidious. They sanitized her. They stripped her of her pen, her politics, and her anger. They edited her essays out of the curriculum. They packaged her neatly into a children's story about a little girl who learned to speak, and then, conceptually, made sure she never spoke again. When we reduce Helen Keller to a passive symbol of perseverance, We participate in her silencing. We turn her into an instrument to make non-disabled, usually wealthy people feel good about themselves. But Helen Keller didn't want to be our inspirational tool. She wanted a revolution. She didn't want us to just marvel at her ability to feel the water from the pump. She wanted us to ask who owned the pump, why the water is polluted, and why the worker pumping it is losing their sight to pay someone else's rent. It's time we finally let her speak.